The crystal champagne tower shattered the exact second Khadra's internship badge slipped from her trembling fingers and landed at the CEO's polished shoes. 100 elite guests turned. Jabari Okonkwo, the man who had rejected 99 arranged dates without blinking, stood motionless as whispers swept through the ballroom. Khadra should have apologized and run. Instead, she looked past his tailored suit, past the cameras, past the women still fighting for his attention, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Sir, your mother lied to you about why I'm here." The music died, because the terrified intern in front of him was not just another mistake from a ruined blind date. She was the beginning of a secret that could destroy his family. Would you trust someone who entered your life under a lie if your heart still believed they were telling the truth? And before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. If you enjoy emotional, powerful stories filled with secrets, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me for the next part. Jabari Okonkwo did not move for 3 full seconds after Khadra spoke. In a ballroom built for performance, 3 seconds could feel like a public execution. The violinists had stopped playing. The servers stood frozen with silver trays in hand. The women who had spent the evening trying to become Mrs. Okonkwo watched with sharpened eyes, sensing scandal the way hungry animals sensed blood. Khadra's face had lost all color. She understood too late what she had done. She had not only interrupted the final arranged date of the most powerful bachelor in Lagos, she had spoken a sentence that landed like a blade in front of financiers. Board members, politicians, influencers, and family friends who had spent years pretending the Okonkwo name was too polished to crack. Jabari bent slowly and picked up her badge from the floor. The name printed beneath the company logo seemed harmless enough. Khadra Isse, Strategy Intern. He looked at it, then at her. "Come with me," he said. No anger, no raised voice. That frightened her more. He turned and walked toward the private corridor behind the ballroom, expecting obedience as naturally as breathing. Khadra followed because there was nothing else to do. Behind them, the whispers exploded. She planned that. "Who is she? Did you hear what she said about his mother?" Another gold digger. By the time the door closed behind them, the music had started again in the ballroom, louder than before, as if rich people believed volume could bury embarrassment. The private corridor was silent, cold, and lined with framed photographs of Okonkwo Global's milestones. Jabari stood with his back to her for a moment, shoulders rigid beneath his tailored black tuxedo. Then he turned. "Start talking." Khadra swallowed. "I did not mean to say it there, but you meant to say it." His tone was flat, controlled, dangerous. She pressed her fingers together to stop their trembling. "Your mother told Human Resources to place me in the Executive Strategy Department 3 weeks ago." Jabari's eyes narrowed. "That does not explain your dramatic entrance." "I never wanted an entrance." Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. "I was delivering revised files to the event coordinator. One of the senior assistants told me to wait near the stage. Then your mother's chief aide stopped me and said, 'Madam Nafisa wanted me to remain in the ballroom until the final toast.'" Jabari said nothing. Khadra forced herself to continue. "She said Madam wanted you to notice that the company is bringing in a new type of young talent." Those were her words. She made it sound professional. But the way she looked at me... Khadra exhaled sharply. It did not feel professional. Something dark moved behind Jabari's expression. His mother had arranged 99 dates in 2 years. Heiresses, politicians' daughters, beauty queens, lawyers from powerful families, women whose surnames came with land influence or strategic value. She always called it concern. Tradition. Stability. Legacy. He called it harassment in silk gloves. And yet this was different. This was not another date. This was a stranger with frightened eyes and a cheap internship badge standing in a private hallway accusing his mother of planting her in his path. "Why would my mother choose you?" he asked. Khadra almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have been asking myself the same thing every day." Jabari studied her carefully, then as if seeing her for the first time outside the chaos of crystal music and gossip. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, rehearsed way of the women from the ballroom. Her beauty carried strain, long hours, responsibility, the kind of exhaustion expensive makeup could not imitate. Her dark blue dress was formal enough for the event, but plainly altered from something older. Her shoes were practical. Her badge clip was cracked. Nothing about her said hunter. Everything about her said survivor. That should have made this simpler. Instead, it made her more interesting. "What exactly did my mother say to you?" he asked. Khadra hesitated. Jabari noticed. "Choose carefully." She said. Khadra answered slowly that this company rewards loyal people, and that if I did everything I was told, my future would change. "Did she ask you to flirt with me?" "No." "Did she ask you to spy on me?" "No." "Did she ask you to report on me?" Khadra's silence lasted half a second too long. Jabari's face hardened. "She asked for observations," Khadra said quickly. "Not private things. Just your schedule, your mood after meetings, which executives you trusted, whether you seemed serious about any woman she introduced." The silence after that was worse than shouting. Jabari let out a soft breath through his nose. It almost sounded like laughter, but colder. "So my mother assigned an intern to monitor her son." Khadra's eyes burned with shame. "I never sent anything useful." "Meaning you sent something." "Only public details. Things anyone in the building could see." Her chin lifted despite her fear. "And I hated it. Yet you kept the job." The words hit where she was weakest. She looked away. Yes, she had kept the job, because her salary did not belong only to her, because medicine had to be paid for, because rent did not care about pride, because desperation made people swallow things that would have disgusted them in better years. "I needed the work," she said quietly. Jabari had heard that sentence from hundreds of employees, but in this corridor stripped of performance it landed differently. He should have dismissed her. He should have called security, terminated her internship, and sent a clear message to his mother that he would not tolerate games. Instead, he asked, "Why tell me tonight?" Khadra's answer came at once. "Because I watched those women circling you out there like the winner gets a trophy, and I saw your face." That surprised him. "My face?" "You looked tired," she said. "Not angry, not proud, just tired. Like a man being sold in a room full of smiles." For one dangerous second, something human flashed through Jabari's eyes. Then it disappeared. "You speak boldly for an intern. You listen more than I expected for a CEO." That nearly earned a smile. Nearly. A knock sounded at the far end of the corridor. One of Jabari's security staff approached, careful not to interrupt too much. "Sir, Madam Nafisa is asking whether everything is under control." Of course she was. Jabari did not look away from Khadra. "Tell my mother I will speak to her later." The guard hesitated. "Yes, sir." When he left, Jabari slipped Khadra's badge into his pocket. She frowned. "I need that. You'll get it tomorrow." "I cannot enter the building without it. Then report directly to the 32nd floor at 8 in the morning." Her eyes widened. "The executive floor?" "Yes. I'm an intern, I am aware." She stared at him, trying to understand the shift. "Are you firing me?" she asked. "No." "Then what are you doing?" "Now." Jabari did smile, but it was the kind of smile that made men in boardrooms confess. "I'm correcting an administrative mistake." The next morning, Khadra stood outside the private elevator of Okonkwo Global with a temporary pass and a pulse so loud she could hear it in her ears. Employees flowed around her in expensive suits and controlled ambition. The tower itself seemed designed to remind everyone who held power. Dark glass, steel, silent elevators, polished floors that reflected heels like blades. She had spent 3 weeks on lower floors where interns were useful and invisible. The 32nd floor was different. It was where strategy became law. When the elevator doors opened, Jabari was already inside. Not in a tuxedo now, in a charcoal suit with no tie tablet in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked less like a man and more like a decision no one could reverse. He glanced at her temporary badge. "You're late by 40 seconds. Her mouth fell open. "I was here before 8. The elevator arrived at 8:00 and 40 seconds. He handed her coffee without warning. "Keep up." She stepped inside, confused enough to obey. As the elevator rose, neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Jabari said, "From this moment when we are inside the company and not in formal executive spaces, you will address me as Malik Dube." She turned sharply. That is the name you will use. That is not your name. It is today." She stared. "Why? Because I want to know how people behave when they do not think they are standing in front of the CEO. Khadra's grip tightened around the coffee cup. This was madness. This was also a test. A fake identity, she asked softly. A limited one. That sounds like a lie. It is a lie. The honesty of that answer unsettled her more than deception would have. The elevator doors opened. Jabari stepped out first. "Welcome to strategy." Khadra followed him into a world of glass offices, muted screens, and assistants who suddenly looked at her with new calculation. She could feel the shift instantly. Curiosity, envy, suspicion. One assistant approached with a folder. "Sir, the Mbeki numbers." He cut him off. "Later." Then he turned to Khadra and spoke just loudly enough for the nearby staff to hear. "She'll be shadowing the restructuring team this week. Full access under my authorization." The assistant blinked. The intern Jabari did not even look at him. "Yes," he said. "The intern." Khadra felt every eye on her. A trap could look exactly like an opportunity. As she followed Jabari no Malik toward the glass conference room, she noticed something that made the back of her neck go cold. On the far wall of his private office hung an old family photograph. Jabari as a boy, his father, his mother, and tucked half visible in the corner of the frame, almost cropped out entirely, was a woman Khadra recognized instantly from a faded hospital envelope hidden beneath her bed. She stopped walking. Her breath caught. Because she had not just entered the CEO's floor, she had stepped closer to the family she had been trying to understand for years. Khadra did not realize she had stopped walking until Jabari turned back and saw the color leave her face. The glass hallway behind them reflected everything too clearly. His controlled expression, her sudden stillness, the assistant's pretending not to stare. "What is it?" he asked. Khadra forced herself to move again. Nothing. Jabari's gaze sharpened. He had spent half his life in rooms full of liars. He knew the sound of a false answer before the last letter left someone's mouth. But he did not press her there, not with staff watching, not when curiosity already flickered through the floor like dry grass near fire. He opened the conference room door and waited for her to enter first. The room overlooked Lagos in a sweep of sunlit glass and steel. The city sprawled below in restless motion. Traffic dust, cranes, wealth, hunger, ambition. It reminded Khadra that this building was not just a workplace. It was a machine, a giant machine that consumed weakness and called it efficiency. Jabari set his tablet on the table. "Sit." Khadra stayed standing. "Before anything else, I need to ask you something." His brow lifted slightly, amused by her nerve. "You seem to think your position includes interrogation rights. I need to know whether this is punishment." That landed harder than she meant it to. Jabari leaned one hand on the back of a chair. Do I look like a man who enjoys subtle punishments? No, Khadra said honestly. You look like a man who prefers direct destruction. For one brief second, a real smile touched his mouth. Then it vanished. This is not punishment, he said. It is observation. Of me, of everyone. She took a slow breath and sat. Jabari remained standing. People behave differently around power, he said. Some perform, some flatter, some disappear, some become cruel because they think cruelty is how serious people prove they belong. He folded his arms. I want to know what this floor looks like through the eyes of someone who does not belong to it. Khadra met his gaze. And if what I see embarrasses you, then the embarrassment will belong to whoever earned it. That answer unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Arrogance was predictable. This was not. He slid a folder toward her. The restructuring unit is reviewing labor costs in 3 subsidiaries. Read the summaries. Tell me what you notice. Khadra opened it carefully. Numbers, charts, department cuts, temporary contracts, facility consolidation. She read fast, though she kept her expression neutral. Jabari watched her instead of the skyline. She did not perform confusion to seem humble. She did not fake confidence to impress him. She read the way hungry people ate quickly, efficiently, with total focus. After 7 minutes, she looked up. These cuts target the lowest paid staff first, she said. That is not a revelation. No. But this is. She tapped one page. The report calls it streamlining, but executive travel spending increased 12% in the same quarter. Bonuses are untouched. The pain is being pushed downward, not shared. Jabari said nothing. Khadra turned another page. And this maternity leave revision, who wrote it? Legal reviewed it. It punishes pregnancy without saying pregnancy. Her voice cooled. A woman returns after childbirth and loses project ranking because of continuity gaps. She then becomes first in line for redundancy. It is clean on paper and filthy in practice. Silence filled the room. Jabari slowly pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He had spent the previous year hearing polished executives speak about efficiency with the emotional range of marble. None of them had used the word filthy. None of them had been wrong. Go on, he said. Khadra hesitated. You asked what I notice? I did. So I am answering as an intern, no. As yourself. That was dangerous. More dangerous than the fake name. More dangerous than the private elevator. Because answering as herself was the one luxury life had not often allowed her. She lowered her eyes to the report again. These numbers were designed by people who will never meet the workers they erase. She turned one final page. And whoever approved this assumes the people at the bottom are too frightened to resist. Jabari's jaw tightened. He had approved the first draft. Not out of malice, out of exhaustion, out of routine, out of trusting people whose intelligence had slowly numbed into indifference. He reached for the folder. The meeting starts in 10 minutes. With who? The people who wrote it. Khadra blinked. I was not prepared for a meeting. Now you are. When they entered the strategy chamber, 6 executives were already seated around the long black table. Screens glowed. Water glasses stood untouched. The atmosphere smelled faintly of perfume, printer toner, and ego. At the head sat Eunice Beko, Chief Operations Officer, elegant and hard-faced. Near her was Sei Falade from Legal 2 Finance Directors and the HR Vice President, Miriam Adesina. Miriam's eyes landed on Khadra and cooled instantly. The intern, she asked. Jabari took his seat. Yes. Eunice gave a tiny laugh. We are discussing a confidential restructuring plan, not running a mentorship luncheon. Jabari clasped his hands. Then be grateful she can read. No one smiled. Khadra sat at the far side, pulse hammering, and kept her face still. The presentation began. Slides. Projections. Words like optimization, productivity, alignment, workforce, elasticity. Each phrase floated across the screen like expensive perfume covering rot. Then came the maternity policy. Miriam spoke crisply. We are not targeting women. We are protecting output stability. Jabari glanced at Khadra. Do you agree? Every head turned. Khadra's throat tightened. This was a trap. No, she realized. It was worse. It was a stage. I think the language protects the company from accountability, she said. A finance director snorted softly. Miriam's smile sharpened. Would you like to expand on that, Miss Khadra Issa? Yes. Please educate the room. The insult was perfectly dressed. Khadra folded her hands in her lap so no one would see them shake. You define performance in a way that automatically punishes anyone whose body forces interruption? She said. Mostly mothers. You call it neutral because the document never says women. But the outcome remains the same. Miriam leaned back. Business cannot pause for sentiment. Khadra turned to face her fully now. Justice is not sentiment. The room went still. Eunice's eyes flicked to Jabari, expecting him to cut the insolent girl down. He did not. Miriam laughed without warmth. You are very young. And you are very practiced, Khadra replied before caution could stop her. A sharp breath moved around the table. Jabari should have intervened then. Any sensible CEO would have. Instead, he said, Answer her point. Miriam's face changed. Only slightly. But Khadra saw it. Jabari saw it too. The meeting grew colder from that moment forward. The executives spoke more carefully, as if the presence of an intern had somehow become dangerous. Or perhaps not the intern. Perhaps the CEO's refusal to silence her. By the end, Jabari had suspended the policy for review and ordered a full human impact analysis. When the others filed out, Miriam paused beside Khadra's chair. You should be careful, she said softly. Visibility at your level is rarely a blessing. Khadra looked up. Is that advice? Miriam's smile was thin. No. Experience. Once the room emptied, Jabari stood by the window, hands in his pockets. You enjoy chaos, Khadra said. He glanced over his shoulder. No. I enjoy honesty. Chaos usually follows it. She should not have smiled. But she did. And to her own shock, so did he. It was a small thing. Fragile. Gone quickly. Still something shifted. That afternoon the shift deepened. A junior analyst named Tariro broke down in the women's washroom after learning that her contract might not be renewed. She was 6 months pregnant, unmarried, and supporting both her younger brothers and her widowed mother. By the time Khadra found her, the woman was trying to cry quietly into paper towels, humiliated by the effort of making no sound. Khadra locked the door behind her. Who told you? She asked. Tunde from HR. Tariro whispered. He said nothing is final, but I should prepare. He said women like me become a risk. Women like me. Khadra had heard that phrase in different forms her whole life. Poor girls like you. Girls without fathers like you. Quiet girls like you. Women with problems like you. It was always the same sentence wearing a different coat. She crouched beside Tariro and held out a bottle of water. You are not a risk, Khadra said. Tariro laughed bitterly through tears. That is kind, but kindness does not pay school fees. No, Khadra said. It doesn't. She thought for 1 second. Then stood. Come with me. Tariro stared. Where to the only person in this building arrogant enough to reverse this before lunch? Tariro's eyes widened in horror. The CEO, yes. We'll both be fired. Khadra opened the door. Then at least we'll be fired, loudly. 10 minutes later, Jabari was in the middle of a call with 2 foreign investors when Khadra walked straight into his office without knocking. His assistant nearly had a heart attack. Jabari muted the call slowly. This had better be important. Khadra stepped aside, revealing Tariro behind her, pale with panic. "It is Khadra," said. The assistant began. "Sir, I tried to stop." "Leave us." The door closed. Jabari looked from Khadra to the pregnant analyst and back again. What happened? Khadra did not soften it. "Your company is terrorizing women for having children." That was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, that something inside Jabari began to break open. Not because she challenged him, others had done that, but because she dragged suffering into his office and refused to let power call it policy. And while Tariro stumbled through her account fighting tears, Jabari listened in silence. When she finished, he pressed a button on his desk. "Get me HR, legal and operations in 15 minutes. His voice had gone dangerously calm. Then he looked at Tariro. "No one will threaten your position again. Not today." Tariro nearly collapsed with relief. Khadra said nothing, but when she turned to leave, Jabari called her back. He opened a drawer, took out a slim velvet box, and set it on the desk between them. "For your work today," he said. Khadra frowned. "What is that?" "Open it!" Inside lay a delicate gold bracelet, simple but unmistakably expensive. For one heartbeat, the office went silent. Then Khadra closed the box and pushed it back toward him. "No." Jabari blinked. "No, I do not want gifts for telling the truth." A strange expression crossed his face. Not offense? Shock? Because women had accepted jewels from him before they accepted his sentences. Because board members treated access to his approval like currency. Because in his world, expensive things smoothed discomfort. Khadra stood straight. Help people because it is right, not because you want to reward the witness. She turned and walked out. Jabari remained still long after the door shut. On his desk, the unopened gold bracelet gleamed uselessly in the afternoon light. And for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, the CEO of Okonkwo Global felt something dangerously close to being seen. But as dusk gathered over Lagos, Khadra left the building and stepped onto the crowded street below, only to feel it again. That sensation of being watched. Across the road, half hidden beside a newspaper kiosk, stood an older man in a worn, dark jacket, his eyes fixed on the small silver pendant at her throat. When Khadra turned sharply, he flinched. Then he disappeared into the evening crowd. The feeling did not leave her. Even after Khadra boarded the crowded Danfo bus, even after the conductor shouted for change and bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in the humid Lagos evening, even after the city blurred into headlights, roadside smoke, and neon shop signs trembling in the dust. Someone had been watching her, not with the bold hunger of street thieves, not with the lazy arrogance of rich men in tinted cars. This had been different. Recognition. That frightened her more. By the time she stepped off the bus in the outer district where the roads grew narrower and the buildings gave up, pretending to be permanent, the sky had darkened fully. She wrapped her scarf closer and walked fast past mechanics packing up for the night, women selling roasted corn, children chasing each other between puddles. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, but her pulse remained wrong. At the end of the lane stood St. Brigid Private Recovery Center, though the word private was almost comic. The building looked like it had lost an argument with time years ago. Faded cream paint peeled from the walls. The iron gate leaned slightly to one side. One fluorescent light buzzed weakly above the entrance, as if it too was too tired to continue. Khadra signed in at the desk with the nurse on duty, who knew her so well she no longer asked questions. "Room 12, the nurse said softly. She was restless today. "Thank you." Khadra climbed the stairs and entered the narrow room with the same quiet reverence she always carried in here. Ashabara lay by the window, thin beneath the blanket, one side of her body nearly motionless. The stroke had taken her speech in pieces, and her strength in handfuls. Some days she remembered names. Some days she stared at the wall as if life had become something happening too far away to rejoin. Tonight her eyes shifted slowly toward Khadra. For a moment they sharpened. Not fully, but enough. Khadra's throat tightened. "It's me." She set down a small paper bag of fruit, adjusted the blanket, checked the medicine log, and sat. This ritual had become her second skeleton. Without it, she would not know how to stand. "You were restless," she whispered. "Did you fight the nurses again?" The corner of Asha's mouth moved. Maybe a failed smile, maybe pain. Khadra took her hand carefully. "I brought oranges. The sweet kind. Not the terrible ones from the stall downstairs." Asha's fingers twitched weakly in her palm. Sometimes that was all Khadra got. A twitch, a blink, a look that said somewhere deep inside the woman was still walking through locked rooms trying to return. It had to be enough, because there had never been anyone else. No father who could be named, no family who claimed them, no past that arrived in a clean line. Only fragments, hospital bills, a silver pendant, a half-burned photograph, and years of knowing that the woman in this bed loved her fiercely while fearing something even more fiercely. Khadra reached into her bag and took out the folded invoice from the nurse's desk. 2 weeks overdue. Her chest tightened. She had already delayed paying her own rent. Already sold the last gold earrings she had owned from childhood. Already skipped meals often enough that hunger had become background noise. Now even the internship salary was no longer enough. And tonight, for the first time, she hated herself for still being relieved she had not lost the job. She should have told Jabari nothing. She should have stayed invisible. But invisibility had never saved anyone she loved. Asha made a strained sound in her throat. Khadra leaned closer. "What is it?" The older woman's eyes moved toward the pendant at Khadra's neck. The small silver oval had gone dark with age, its engraved pattern nearly worn smooth. Khadra had worn it since childhood, because every time she tried to remove it, Asha became agitated, sometimes violently so. Still this Khadra asked softly, touching it. Asha blinked once. "Yes," Khadra murmured. "I know. Always." But tonight the look in Asha's eyes was different, sharper, frightened. Then with terrible effort, Asha's fingers clawed weakly at the blanket and forced one word through her damaged mouth. "No." Khadra froze. The word was broken, barely air, but it was there. "No," she repeated. Asha's eyes filled with panic. The old fear was back. The fear Khadra had seen since girlhood, whenever certain questions came too close. "Are you saying no to the pendant?" Khadra asked. "No." To the company, Asha's lashes trembled. "To the family," Khadra whispered. Tears slid from the corners of Asha's eyes. Khadra's own vision blurred. Before she could ask again, the door opened. Nurse Efe stepped in with a clipboard and stopped when she saw Khadra kneeling by the bed. "You got a word out of her?" Khadra stood too fast. "Yes." She said no. The nurse gave a sad smile. "Sometimes old fears come back before memory does." "What does that mean?" "It means trauma remembers even when language doesn't." She set the clipboard down. "You should prepare yourself, Khadra. Patients like her often hold on to one terror for years. The body may forget, but the soul continues guarding the door. Guarding the door." Khadra glanced back at Asha and felt cold. Because she had spent years believing the silence around their life came from weakness. What if it came from protection instead? When she finally left the room an hour later, she paid half the outstanding bill and promised the rest within the week. The nurse did not shame her. That almost made it worse. Outside, the night air felt thinner than before. She had just reached the gate when she saw him again. The man from the street. Older, broad-shouldered once, but bent now, by time wearing a worn jacket and sensible shoes. He stood just beyond the weak pool of light from the entrance lamp, as if uncertain whether he had permission to exist in it. Khadra stopped immediately. "Who are you?" The man lifted both hands slowly, palms empty. "Please don't be afraid. That depends on why you've been following me." He looked at her pendant again, then forced his eyes upward. "My name is Bekizizwe Dube," he said. "I used to work for Jabari Okonkwo." The name hit her like a struck bell. Jabari's father. The dead patriarch whose face still looked down from the company's marble walls. Khadra did not move. "You have the wrong person." "No," he said quietly. "I was afraid for years that one day I would see that pendant again. And today I did." Her heartbeat turned violent. The lane behind her suddenly felt too open, the hospital too far, the city too large to hide in. "What do you want?" Bekizizwe swallowed, and for the first time she saw that he was not hunting. He was shaking. "I want to know if the woman upstairs is Asha Bar." Khadra's face emptied of expression. Years of poverty had taught her that fear was easiest to survive when no one could read it. "Leave," she said. He took one desperate step forward. "Please, if it's Asha, then the child survived. We were told neither of you did." Khadra went cold from scalp to heel. The child survived. Not you. Not she. The child. Her. "You need to leave now," she said again, quieter. But Bekizizwe had crossed some internal line simply by speaking. Now the truth seemed to press out of him in fragments too old to hold back. "I worked for the chairman for 23 years, he said. "I carried files, arranged private meetings, buried things I was told never happened. Then one night there was a car, rain screaming, and suddenly all records vanished." His voice broke. "I was told a young woman and her daughter died before they could be reached." Khadra's fingers curled around her bag strap until her nails hurt. "You're lying. I wish I were." "Why come now?" "Because I saw you leave the Okonkwo Tower yesterday, and today I saw the pendant properly." She stared. Yesterday. So he had been following her longer than she realized. "I'm calling the police," she said. Bekizizwe nodded once, as if accepting the punishment. "You may. But before you do, answer one thing." She said nothing. He pointed not at her face but at the silver pendant at her throat. "That was commissioned by Jabari Okonkwo himself. I know because I collected it from the jeweler." Khadra's breath caught. Impossible. Every instinct told her to run, but another instinct, older, starved, dangerous, rose beneath it. The instinct that had kept her searching through old papers, old hospital envelopes, old lies. "What are you saying?" she asked. Bekizizwe's eyes shone in the dim light. "I am saying that pendant belonged to a little girl who disappeared after a scandal the Okonkwo family buried with money and threats." His voice dropped lower. "And if you are who I think you are, then the most powerful family in this city has been hiding your existence for years." The night seemed to tilt. Khadra took one step back, then another. Inside the hospital, a metal tray crashed somewhere down the hall. A dog barked in the distance. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But for Khadra, something had already split open. Because she suddenly remembered the photograph in Jabari's office. The woman half-cropped from the frame, the hospital envelope hidden under her bed, the panic in Asha's eyes. And now this man, this shaking ghost from the Okonkwo past, standing under a broken lamp and looking at her as if she had walked out of a grave. Bekizizwe reached into his jacket very slowly. Khadra stepped back, ready to run. He froze. "It's only a photograph." He held it out with trembling fingers. An old photo, slightly bent. damaged by time. A younger Jabari Okonkwo stood beside a smiling woman Khadra knew instantly, despite the lost years, the illness, the ruin. Asha. And in the man's arms was a little girl, no older than 3, wearing the exact same silver pendant now hanging from Khadra's throat. Khadra's knees almost gave way. Because the child's face, even through the blur of age and print, was her own. Khadra did not remember walking home. Later, when she tried to replay the night in her mind, all she could clearly recall was the photograph trembling in her hands and the sound of her own breathing turning thin and strange, as if the air itself had become too sharp to swallow. By the time she reached the one-room flat she rented above a tailoring shop, dawn had already begun staining the edges of the sky. She did not remove her shoes. She did not switch on the light. She simply locked the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor with the photograph pressed flat against her chest. For years she had chased fragments. A hospital envelope with no sender's name, a silver pendant Asha had once tried to tear from her neck while sobbing through a panic attack. A half-sentence from an old nurse who had muttered, "Powerful people bury women like us every day." She had built her whole life out of broken things and instinct, and now in one terrible night those instincts had returned holding a face. Jabari Okonkwo, Jabari's father, the man whose portrait lived in marble hallways, the man whose surname opened every locked room in Lagos, the man standing beside her mother in an old photograph holding her as if she belonged to him. Khadra stared at the picture again as dawn crept stronger through the torn curtain. Asha looked young in it, not defeated, not drugged with pain, not half absent behind stroke-ravaged eyes. Young, beautiful. Cautious, yes, but smiling. The kind of smile women wore only when they had forgotten fear for a moment. And Chukwudi was looking at the child in his arms, not at the camera. That detail hurt most, because it looked real, not like pity, not like scandal, like love. Her stomach turned. Jabari's face rose in her mind with brutal clarity. His stillness, his hands, the way he had watched her reject the bracelet, the way his voice lowered when he was trying not to show emotion. No. Her body rejected the possibility before her mind could fully form it. No. If the story Bekizizwe hinted at was true, then the man she had begun to love might not simply belong to the family that ruined hers. He might be her brother. The thought hit her so violently she lurched forward and retched into the metal basin beside the bed. When the nausea passed, she sat on the floor for a long time, shaking. By 8:30 her phone had lit up with 3 missed calls from the office. At 9, a message arrived from an unknown internal number. Report to executive floor immediately. Malik. The false name made her want to laugh and cry at once. She turned the phone face down. At 10:30 there was another message. Where are you? She still did not answer. At 11:15 a third. This is no longer optional. Khadra stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then she did something cowardly and necessary. She switched the phone off. The next time she saw Jabari, it was not at work. It was just after sunset at St. Bridget's. He was standing outside the gate beside his black car jacket, over one arm expression hard enough to crack glass. Khadra stopped dead. For one brief second, neither of them moved. Then Jabari stepped forward. You disappeared. His voice was calm. Too calm. Khadra tightened her grip on her bag. I needed time. You do not vanish from my company after accessing executive files and then ignore direct messages. I did not access anything I was not shown. Then why are you hiding? The word landed with such force she almost laughed. Because hiding was exactly what everyone around this story had done for years. The rich, the loyal, the guilty, the frightened. Now it was her turn. I am not hiding, she said. Jabari studied her face, and whatever he saw there made him lower his voice. What happened? Khadra looked away. The hospital light buzzed weakly above them. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old love song with too much static. Ordinary sounds, cruel sounds when a life was splitting open. "You should leave," she said. "I came here because one of the accounts department managers told me your salary advance request was marked urgent by this clinic." She froze. Shame rose hot and immediate. "You investigated my finances. I investigated your absence." He took another step closer. "Why are you paying private medical bills on an intern stipend?" Khadra said nothing. Jabari's jaw tightened. "Who is inside someone who matters to me? That is obvious. Then let that be enough." Normally that tone would have ended the conversation. Men like Jabari were used to obedience, not walls. But tonight he did not retreat. Instead he looked up at the building, at the rusted gate, the failing light, the exhausted structure of a place where people survived more than they healed. Then he looked back at her. "You cried," he said quietly. Khadra swallowed. "Everyone cries, not like this." Her anger came fast because fear had made room for nothing else. "You do not get to read my face and demand access to my pain just because you signed my paycheck." His expression changed, not to anger, to something deeper, something injured. "Is that what you think this is?" She almost told him then. Almost. The photograph burned in her bag like a second heartbeat. One word from her and everything would shatter his certainty, her hope, the fragile thing growing between them. So she lied. "Yes," she said. Jabari went still. The look in his eyes made her want to take the word back. But she did not. Because if the truth was what she feared, then every step toward him was already a sin. He exhaled once. "All right." That frightened her more than shouting would have. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her permanent badge, the one he had taken at the gala, and held it out to her. "I should have returned this sooner." Khadra stared at it. "You brought it here, I also brought your revised contract." His tone stayed flat. "Your internship has been converted into a 6-month paid analyst appointment, effective immediately." Shock cut through everything else. "What you earned it." "No." He frowned. "No, I cannot take favors." "It is not a favor. How would I know the difference that hit harder than she intended?" Jabari's face hardened slightly. "You think I promote women for convenience? I think powerful families do what protects themselves." The words hung between them like smoke. For the first time since she had met him, Jabari looked openly angry. Not loud, not wild, just cold. "And which family are we discussing right now? Khadra mine, or whatever secret has turned you into a stranger in 24 hours? She flinched. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze sharpened instantly. "So there is something." Khadra stepped back. "Please stop. What did you find?" "Nothing. That is a lie." "Yes," she said, voice cracking. "And if I tell you the truth, it will ruin everything." The sentence escaped before she could stop it. Jabari stared at her. The night seemed to narrow around them. He spoke very softly. "Tell me anyway." Her fingers moved to the bag, automatically pressing against the folded photograph. She could feel its edges through the fabric. If she pulled it out now, there would be no return, no pretending, no distance, no waiting. Just blood and names and consequences. Instead, she whispered, "What if the reason your mother placed me near you was never about observation?" Jabari's expression darkened. Then what was it about Khadra forced herself to meet his eyes? What if she already knew who I was, Silence? The old static-filled love song from the radio drifted through the lane again, absurd and almost cruel. Jabari looked at her as if he had stopped understanding the shape of the world. "Who are you?" he asked. Khadra laughed once bitterly because She had never hated a question more. I don't know. That at least was true. Before he could answer, the hospital door opened behind her, and Nurse Efe rushed out. Khadra. The urgency in her voice snapped them both around. What happened? Khadra cried. It's your mother she's seizing. Khadra ran before the sentence fully ended. Jabari followed without being asked. Room 12 had become a storm. Asha's body jerked violently against the bed rails, one arm striking the blanket in broken rhythm. A nurse tried to hold her steady while another fumbled with medication. The monitor shrilled in panicked bursts. Khadra reached the bedside, breathless. Mama, Mama, I'm here. Asha's eyes were wide open. Wild, not vacant, not lost. Terrified. She turned her face sharply toward the doorway behind Khadra, toward Jabari, and everything in her changed. Recognition detonated across her features. Not confusion, not general fear. Recognition. Her mouth strained, twisted, fought past the damage. The nurses could barely hold her. Khadra caught her hand. Mama, look at me. Look at me. But Asha was staring at Jabari as if death itself had walked into the room wearing a familiar face. Then, with a force no one thought she still possessed, she dragged air into her lungs and forced out a raw, broken sentence. His father! The room froze. Jabari stopped moving. Khadra's blood turned to ice. Asha's eyes rolled with panic and pain as tears streamed into her hairline. Again she fought for speech, every syllable tearing through her ruined body. His father did this. Then her head fell hard against the pillow, the monitor screaming as the nurses surged around her. Khadra stumbled back, one hand over her mouth, because in that single shattered moment, the photograph in her bag and the terror in her mother's voice had fused into one unbearable possibility. And behind her in the doorway, Jabari Okonkwo stood white-faced and motionless, as if the dead sins of his father had just reached through time and struck him across the chest. For 3 full seconds after Asha's words, no one in room 12 seemed to breathe. The monitor screamed, a nurse shouted for diazepam, another reached for oxygen, but for Khadra time had already split open. His father did this. Not they, not someone, not a faceless monster from a buried past. His father. Khadra turned so slowly it felt like her body no longer belonged to her. Jabari was still standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the color drained from his face. He looked less like a CEO in that moment, and more like a man who had just been shoved toward the edge of a cliff in the dark. I didn't know, he said. No one had accused him yet. Still, those were the first words he found. Khadra stared at him with tears burning in her eyes. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was not loud. That made it worse. The nurses managed to stabilize Asha enough to stop the seizure, but the room had changed. The thin air itself now felt poisoned with names. Nurse Efe looked between Khadra and Jabari without understanding the story. But she understood enough to know that whatever had just surfaced was older than the monitors, older than the hospital bed, older than the years of medical debt. Please wait outside, she told Jabari carefully. He did not move at first. Then he nodded once. Khadra did not watch him leave. She went back to Asha's bedside and took her hand with both of hers, as if holding hard enough might keep the truth from breaking the rest of the way through. Asha's eyes fluttered weakly. The seizure had exhausted her. Her mouth moved, but nothing clear came. Tears gathered again at the corners of her eyes. I know, Khadra whispered, though she did not know. Not fully. Not enough. I know, Mama. But that was a lie, too. She knew only this: the fear was real, the photograph was real, and the man she had begun to trust belonged by blood to the house where that fear had been born. When Nurse Efe finally persuaded her to step into the corridor, Jabari was waiting by the far wall under a failing bulb. His jacket was still folded over his arm, but he no longer looked composed. He looked dangerous only in the way wounded animals did. Still silent, impossible to predict. Khadra stopped several feet away. Neither spoke first. Then Jabari asked very quietly, "What exactly did she mean?" Khadra let out a small, broken laugh. "You tell me." His jaw tightened. "I can't answer for a dead man without facts." "Facts?" Her voice sharpened. "My mother just nearly tore herself apart trying to say your father destroyed her life. And I'm asking you to let me understand what she was trying to say. You understood enough." Something moved in his face then. Pain, yes, but also anger. Not at her, at the ground beneath both of them for shifting too fast to stand on. Khadra reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out the old photograph. When Jabari saw it, his expression changed completely. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "Where did you get that?" "From a man named Bekizizwe Dube." Recognition flashed at once. "You met Beki Jabari," said. So he was real to Jabari, too. Not some invented ghost. Not a stranger using a famous surname as bait. Khadra held up the picture between them like evidence in a trial. "He said your father commissioned this pendant." She touched the silver oval at her throat. "He said the family buried a scandal. He said the woman in this photograph is my mother." Jabari looked at the image, then at her, then back at the image. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat with shock. "That's my father, I know. And that is—" He swallowed. "That is your mother." "Yes." The silence after that felt almost sacred in its horror. Then Jabari looked directly at the little girl in the photo, at the pendant, at Khadra. And Khadra saw the thought land in him the exact same way it had landed in her the night before Hard Ugly Absolute. "No," he said. She gave a tiny nod, tears already falling. "Yes?" His face emptied. "No," he repeated, but now it sounded less like denial and more like a man trying to hold back a wave with his bare hands. Khadra's voice cracked. "If Jabari Okonkwo is the man in that photo, and if I am that child, then tell me what else I'm supposed to think." Jabari shut his eyes. And because he was intelligent, because he was fast, because he had lived too long among secrets not to recognize their structure, he understood instantly what she meant. Not just scandal. Blood. Possibility. Contamination. He opened his eyes again, and Khadra saw something in them she had never seen before. Fear. Not for his reputation. For them. "We need proof," he said. She almost slapped him for how calm that sounded. "We needed proof before I let myself care about you," she whispered. "Now we need proof after." His face tightened as if the words had struck bone. "I did not know," he said again. "I know you didn't. Then don't punish me for a crime I haven't even understood yet." Khadra laughed once through tears. "Punish you, Jabari. I am trying not to drown." That finally cracked something in him. He took a step closer without touching her. "Then let me help." "No." The refusal came instantly. He stopped. Khadra hugged her arms around herself. "Do you understand what this has done? I spent weeks fighting myself, because every time you looked at me I forgot to be careful. And now every memory feels dirty." He flinched. Good, some small part of her thought. Let him feel at least one splinter of this. But the thought died quickly because the devastation in his face was too real to enjoy. "I will open every file my family has ever hidden," he said. "I will find the truth, and if the truth says we share a father." His silence answered first. Then I will stay away from you." The sentence should have been relief. Instead, it hurt so sharply that Khadra had to look away. He heard it in her breathing. Of course he did. That was when both of them understood the worst part. The problem was no longer whether they cared. The problem was that they already did. By morning, the story had found its first public shape. Not the real story. Never the real story. Something uglier, smaller, easier to spread. At 8:17 a.m., an anonymous entertainment blog published blurry photos from the gala and the hospital gate. The headline was cruelly efficient. CEO's secret intern mistress caught chasing him after failed. 100th date. By 9, internal chat threads at Okonkwo Global were already breathing around it like fire catching paper. By 10, someone leaked that Khadra had been seen entering the executive floor repeatedly under special authorization. By 11, the word intern had disappeared from the gossip. Now she was a climber, a trap, a desperate girl from nowhere who had seduced her way upward and then followed the CEO to a private clinic for sympathy. Cruelty always moved faster than truth. At 11:40, Khadra walked into the office because missing one day had been self-defense, but missing 2 would become surrender. The change in the atmosphere hit her before she reached the elevators. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A receptionist who had once smiled warmly now looked away too quickly. 2 young analysts pretended not to stare. A security guard, embarrassed on her behalf, checked her badge twice, though he had never done that before. By the time she reached her desk, an email awaited her. Meeting Human Resources Review. Immediate attendance required no explanation. Of course, when she entered the HR conference room, Miriam Adesina was already seated at the table in a cream suit, hands folded, expression arranged into concern so polished it almost counted as art. Beside her sat Tunda from compliance and a junior legal officer taking notes. Khadra Miriam said softly, "Please sit." The softness was the first cruelty. Khadra remained standing. "What is this about?" Miriam tilted her head. "We are conducting a routine internal inquiry regarding inappropriate boundary concerns and potential misuse of executive access." There it was. Not truth. Language. Language built to stain without touching. Khadra let out a breath through her nose. "You mean gossip. We mean risk." Whose Miriam's smile did not move. The company's. Tunda slid a printed packet across the table. Inside were screenshots, cropped photos, timestamps, a record of Khadra's executive floor entry logs, and most viciously of all, a summary of the salary advance request from St. Bridget. Her throat closed. "They accessed my financial emergency file." "Relevant context," Miriam said. "No. Exploitation." Miriam ignored that. "You were placed into executive visibility under unusual conditions. You privately accompanied the CEO to off-site locations. You requested emergency funds while maintaining unauthorized personal contact with him. Taken together, these raise questions." Khadra looked at the pages again and suddenly understood the architecture of the trap. Someone had waited, watched, collected, not to discover truth, but to manufacture motive. She lifted her head slowly. "Who gave this to you?" Miriam smiled. "That is not how internal protections work." Khadra thought of Tendai Moyo, then the rival executive always circling the edges of high-level decisions, always eager for Jabari to look unstable, distracted, compromised. A scandal involving a poor intern and a lovesick CEO would be useful. Very useful. And Miriam was the perfect instrument elegant enough to call cruelty governance. "You want me to resign?" Khadra said. Miriam's silence confirmed it. The junior legal officer kept staring at his notes. Tunda adjusted his pen. No one in the room wanted justice. They wanted cleanliness, a quiet disposal. Another woman carried out in a cardboard box so the building could keep pretending it never devoured people. Khadra sat at last, not because they had forced her down, because she suddenly felt tired, clear through her bones. "Fine," she said. All three looked up. Miriam blinked. "Fine." Khadra reached for the company letterhead on the table, took the pen from Tunde's hand before he could react, and began writing. The room was so quiet, the sound of the pen seemed rude. When she finished, she slid the page across to Miriam. It was not only a resignation, it was a blade. In 4 short paragraphs, Khadra stated that she was resigning, effective immediately, due to targeted harassment, unauthorized review of private financial distress records, reputational manipulation, and a workplace culture designed to punish poor women more quickly than powerful men. She added one final sentence in clean, steady handwriting. "I did not come to Okonkwo Global to seduce anyone. I came to find the truth about what was done to my mother." Miriam's face changed for the first time, only slightly. But enough. Enough for Khadra to know the sentence had landed exactly where it should. She stood. "You wanted a clean ending," Khadra said. "You won't get one." Then she turned and walked out. She made it halfway down the corridor before she heard footsteps behind her. Jabari. Of course. He caught her wrist gently, not possessively, but desperately enough that she stopped. "What happened?" Khadra pulled her arm free and handed him the carbon copy of the letter. He read it once, then again. When he lifted his eyes, something lethal had entered them. "Who saw this enough people? Who touched your medical records, I don't know." Jabari folded the letter slowly. A terrifying calm settled over him. Khadra had seen powerful men angry before. Loud men, explosive men, petty men. This was worse, because Jabari looked like a man choosing where to bury bodies in a garden no one else knew existed. He slipped the resignation letter into his inside pocket and said with chilling softness, "Go home." Khadra stared at him. "What are you going to do?" He looked toward the HR wing. "Correct a misunderstanding." But before he could move, Khadra spoke the sentence that stopped him cold. "I wrote the truth, Jabari." His eyes returned to hers. She swallowed. "I did not come to your company for you," she said. "I came because somewhere inside that family was the answer to my mother's ruin." The words sat between them like broken glass, and for the first time since the hospital she saw it happen. Not just hurt, not just fear. The clean, merciless heartbreak of a man realizing that even the most honest thing between them had been born inside a lie. Jabari did not go after her. That was the first sign the damage had gone deeper than anger. If rage had been all he felt, he would have stormed into human resources, ripped through locked systems, dragged names into light, and turned the whole tower into a courtroom by sunset. Instead, he stood alone in the executive corridor with Khadra's resignation letter in his pocket, and the feeling that the floor beneath him had become untrustworthy. People still moved around him. Assistants crossed with tablets. Phones rang. A screen down the hall flashed quarterly figures. The company continued breathing like a machine, but inside Jabari every moving part had changed direction. He entered his office, locked the door, and pulled the old photograph from his inner jacket pocket, where Khadra had shoved it at him outside the hospital. For a long time he simply stared at it. His father, Asha, the child, the pendant. He had known Jabari Okonkwo as a disciplined man, a severe man, a calculating man who could shake a minister's hand with one hand while ending 3 careers with the other. He had not known him as sentimental. He had not known him as reckless. He had certainly never known him as a man capable of leaving a hidden child in the shadows of Lagos. But then again, sons rarely knew their fathers. Not truly. They knew the edited version, the official portrait, the lessons selected for them like polished tools. And now the portrait had cracked. He pressed the intercom. "Get me legal archives, internal security compliance, and family office access, immediately." His assistant's voice came through hesitant. "Sir, your mother is in the building." "Good," he said. "She can wait." By noon, he was in the restricted records room beneath the tower with 3 trusted staff members and a silence thick enough to bruise. Old paper had its own smell. Dust. Glue. Time. Records from Chukwudi's final years were supposed to be complete. They were not. 2 boxes from a 10-month period had been removed and never logged back in. Insurance files connected to a private vehicle accident had been manually reclassified. A payment trail to a small legal firm had been erased digitally, but survived in one paper ledger because some exhausted clerk 12 years earlier had forgotten to destroy the hard copy. Jabari stood over the ledger with one palm flat against the table. The payment description was vague. Emergency settlement, BB matter. He looked up sharply. BB. The head of compliance swallowed. Could be initials. Find out whose. Another hour, another locked folder, another missing page. And then the first real fracture. A medical intake copy from a private trauma clinic on the mainland. The patient name had been blacked out by hand. The attending physician's notes were mostly redacted, but one line remained. Female approximately 23, repeated assault indicators, pregnancy recently confirmed, escort requested transfer without police notification. Jabari went cold. The date matched the missing records window. He shut the file and looked at the head of internal security. Pull every family office travel log from that month. Drivers, aircraft, properties, guest houses, everything. Sir, the man said carefully, some of that requires Madame Nafisa's authorization. Jabari lifted his eyes. The man stopped speaking. Then pull it anyway. By mid-afternoon, he was no longer searching only for Khadra's past. He was searching for the point where his family had become a crime scene. At 3:15, his mother finally entered without knocking. Nafisa Okonkwo had not lost the habit of commanding a room simply by appearing in it. She wore a soft cream wrapper with gold embroidery diamonds at her ears and a face perfected by years of never letting the world see what she actually felt. But Jabari had known her too long not to notice the first crack. Her eyes went straight to the records spread open across his desk, then to the photograph, then to him. "You are humiliating this family," she said. He almost laughed. That was how she chose to begin. Not what have you found? Not who showed you this, not my son. What happened? Humiliation. Reputation. Surface first. Always. Jabari stayed seated. Sit down. Nafisa did not move. You storm through archives like a madman because of one manipulative girl and a sick woman in a cheap clinic. He stood so fast the chair rolled backward. The force of it silenced her. Do not speak about Khadra that way in my office. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Nafisa's chin lifted slightly. You are blinded. No, Jabari said. I'm finally looking. For several seconds they stared at each other across the desk, the son who had inherited her steel and the mother who had taught him half of it. Then Jabari held up the photograph. Who is she? Nafisa's face did not change enough for strangers to notice. But he was not a stranger. He saw it, the pulse in her throat, the tiny pause before contempt returned. That woman, she said, was a mistake your father made. Jabari felt something inside him turn hard. A mistake, he repeated. Yes. And the child in Nafisa's silence was answer enough. He stepped closer. The child, mother. At last she exhaled, annoyed by the need to speak plainly. The child should never have become your concern. There it was. Not grief, not remorse. Management. He asked the question very carefully. Was she my father's daughter? Nafisa's eyes flashed. No. The answer came too fast. Jabari did not miss that. You're lying. I am protecting what remains of this family. His laugh came sharp and humorless. By burying women and children? Her mouth tightened. Watch yourself. No. You watch me. He shoved the trauma intake copy across the desk. Repeated assault. Pregnancy. Private transfer. Police silenced. Missing insurance files. Erased payments. And you still think this is about family dignity? Nafisa glanced down at the papers, then away. That single glance gave him more than any confession. He pressed harder. Did father rape Ashabar? The slap arrived before the last word finished. It cut across his face in a clean, hot line. For a moment the room went utterly still. Nafisa's hand trembled once at her side. Do not ever use that word about your father. Jabari turned his head back slowly. When he spoke again, his voice had become lethal. Then give me a better one. She said nothing. He saw it then with terrible clarity, not innocence, not certainty, but panic at language itself. Panic that once the right word existed in open air, the whole architecture of silence would collapse. Who was it, he asked. Her eyes shifted. Barely. Toward the door. Toward escape. Toward some old instinct. Jabari followed the movement, not with his body but with his mind. Not his father. Someone adjacent. Someone protected by the same power. He whispered, It wasn't Chukwudi. Nafisa's jaw locked. He took another step closer, every nerve lit. It was someone you covered for. Still nothing. Then he said the one name he had not thought of in years. Bashiru. That did it. Nafisa's eyes closed, only for a second. But it was enough. Bashiru Bello, her younger brother, his uncle. A smiling brute with political ambitions dead now after a drunken boating accident, the family had mourned with far more ceremony than sincerity. Jabari felt sick, not because the suspicion shocked him, because it fit. Bashiru had always touched shoulders too long, smiled too easily at frightened women, carried entitlement the way other men carried watches, and Chukwudi, disciplined, ruthless Chukwudi, had spent years cleaning up after him. Jabari stepped back as the truth assembled itself in pieces sharp enough to cut. Asha was assaulted by Bashiru, he said. She became pregnant. Father tried to hide it. You tried to bury it. And then somehow Khadra was born inside the wreckage. Nafisa opened her eyes. You know nothing. Then tell me. She lifted her chin, but the elegance was cracking now. Your father wanted to send them away quietly. Settle it. Protect everyone. Protect everyone, Jabari repeated in disbelief. Or protect the Okonkwo name. The two were the same. No, he said. They were never the same. Her composure finally splintered. Do you think I had choices? Do you think powerful women are given clean options? My brother would have destroyed us all. Your father was already ill. Investors were circling. Politicians were waiting for weakness. A scandal like that would have eaten this family alive. Jabari stared at her. There was the logic. The poison he had grown up breathing. Destroy one life to save 5. Bury one truth to protect a dynasty. Call cowardice strategy and sleep under silk. And Khadra, he asked. Why bring her into the company? Nafisa's face hardened again, shame retreating behind control. Because she had started asking questions. Because she was moving too close to archived records she had no right to touch. Because if I kept her near me, I could measure what she knew. Jabari felt disgust rise like acid. You used her. I contained a threat. She is not a threat. She is the bill this family refused to pay. The room fell silent. Then the final piece arrived not from his mother but from the DNA lab. His private phone buzzed against the desk. The expedited results. He opened them with numb fingers. Sample A, Jabari Okonkwo. Sample B, Khadra Issa. Probability of full or half-sibling relationship excluded. For a moment he could not breathe. Not siblings, not blood. Relief hit first, so violent it felt almost immoral. Then rage came roaring behind it, because the absence of blood did not remove the crime. It only clarified it. Khadra was not his father's daughter. She was the child of Nafisa's brother, the man the family had hidden behind Chukwudi's reputation, money, and silence. He looked up slowly from the screen. Nafisa saw his face and knew. "What did you do?" she whispered. Jabari's voice was almost calm again. "The truth," he said, "has just made one very important correction." He picked up the phone and called the only person he could trust to understand the weight of what came next. "Bekizizwe," he said when the old man answered. "I need you at the tower tonight. Bring every copy you kept, every note, every name." Then he ended the call and looked at his mother one last time. "You didn't plant Khadra in this company to help her," he said. "You planted her here to keep her under your hand before she discovered what your brother did." Nafisa said nothing. She did not need to. The silence itself was confession. Jabari slipped the phone back into his pocket. Tomorrow the board would gather for the quarterly shareholder assembly. Tomorrow, Tendai Moyo and the directors loyal to Nafisa planned to pressure him into announcing an engagement to a politically convenient bride and securing the merger vote that would tighten their hold on the company. Tomorrow, in front of the entire empire built on silence, Jabari would decide whether the Okonkwo name deserved to survive the truth. And for the first time in his life, he already knew his answer. By 9 the next morning, the Okonkwo Global Headquarters no longer felt like an office tower. It felt like a kingdom preparing for execution. Black cars lined the private entrance. Shareholders in tailored suits stepped onto marble, with the solemnity of priests arriving at an altar. Financial press waited behind velvet barriers outside the gates, hungry for signs of fracture. Assistants moved at double speed, carrying folders, tablets, sealed envelopes, and whispers. Every floor knew something was wrong. No one knew how wrong. At the top of the tower in the private board preparation suite, Nafisa Okonkwo stood before a mirror while a stylist adjusted the pleats of her wrapper. She looked immaculate, regal, untouched. Only her eyes betrayed the night she had not slept. Across the room, Tendai Moyo paced with a phone in one hand and manufactured confidence in the other. He had spent months building toward this shareholder assembly. The merger vote, the public image reset, the quiet pressure campaign that would make Jabari seem emotionally unstable, romantically compromised, and therefore less fit to lead without guidance. A scandalous intern would help. A graceful engagement announcement would help more. And if both happened on the same day, the markets would forgive almost anything. "We need him contained," Tendai said, keeping his voice low. "He's been unpredictable since yesterday." Nafisa did not turn. "My son is not unpredictable. He is wounded." Tendai smiled faintly. "Wounded men make expensive decisions?" Nafisa's gaze lifted to his in the mirror. "Then pray you have not given him a reason to make one." Tendai said nothing after that, because beneath his ambition he knew one truth: Jabari was dangerous when cold. But he was most dangerous when calm after pain. And all morning the reports from the executive floor said the CEO was very calm. At 9:40, Khadra stood outside St. Brigid's with a phone in her hand, staring at the message she had read 6 times. "Be at Okonkwo Tower by 11. Wear something formal. Do not be afraid. Jabari." No explanation, no apology, no warning, just that. She should have ignored it. Everything in her life would be simpler if she ignored it. But simplicity had never once delivered truth. Nurse Effa came to stand beside her, beneath the weak shade of the awning. "You're going." Khadra let out a dry laugh. How can you tell? Because your face has the look people wear when they know the road ahead is bad, but walk anyway. Khadra looked back through the glass toward room 12, where Asha lay resting after a sedative-heavy morning. I'm tired of roads. Then walk this one so maybe another woman won't have to. That silenced her. She looked down at the phone again, then at the pendant resting cold against her throat. By 10:15, she was in a plain, dark dress borrowed from the clinic administrator's niece, her hair braided back neatly, her face bare except for resolve she did not feel. Bekizizwe arrived in a worn but clean suit clutching a battered leather satchel to his chest, as though it contained both evidence and ghosts. It's all in here, he said. Copies of the settlement letters, the driver logs. Notes your father. He stopped, corrected himself. Notes Chukwudi made and never filed. Khadra heard the correction. Felt it too. Do you trust him? Bekizizwe asked quietly, as they entered the hired car Jabari had sent. Khadra looked out the window as Lagos flashed by in heat and exhaust and noise. No, she said after a long pause. But I believe he hates lies. At the tower they were taken through a private service entrance, not the main lobby. That told Khadra immediately that whatever Jabari planned, it was not small. An assistant led them to a secure holding room just off the main shareholders' hall. Through the insulated wall came the muffled hum of gathering power microphones being tested. Chairs moved controlled laughter greetings between men who shook hands while measuring weakness. Jabari arrived at 10:52. He entered alone. No assistants, no legal team, no entourage, just a dark suit, no tie, and a face carved into stillness. For a second, neither he nor Khadra spoke. Bekizizwe stood awkwardly as though unsure whether grief required bowing. Then Jabari looked at Khadra and said, The DNA results came back. Her spine straightened. He did not soften it. We are not related. The words should have brought relief first. Instead, what came first was pain. Pain for how much terror had been necessary to get there. Pain for the fact that blood had become the measure of whether she was allowed to breathe near him. Pain for her mother whose life had been ripped apart long before a lab report corrected the family tree. Still relief came next, quick and guilty and immense. Khadra closed her eyes for 1 second only. When she opened them, Jabari was still watching her, not possessively, not tenderly, just with the exhausted honesty of a man standing in the ruins of everything he was taught to protect. It was your mother's brother, she said. He nodded once. Bashiru Bello. Even hearing the name spoken aloud made the room feel dirtier. Bekizizwe spoke, then voice rough. Chukwudi tried to move Asha and the child out quietly after the assault. Nafisa blocked the police route and turned it into a private settlement. There was a crash 2 nights later during the transfer. Bashiru's people reported both dead. But the driver panicked, abandoned the scene, and sold the story before anyone checked carefully. Khadra's throat tightened. And my mother, alive, Bekizizwe said. Barely. Hidden in clinics under false names. Easier for the family if she remained a rumor instead of a witness. Jabari's jaw flexed once hard. Khadra asked the question that had sat in her chest all morning. Why did Chukwudi keep sending money? Jabari answered this time. Because guilt is sometimes the only form of decency cowards can afford. The sentence hit them both. He knew it. She knew it. Because Chukwudi had not been the attacker, but he had still chosen the family name over justice. That mattered. Jabari stepped closer to the table and laid out the plan with chilling clarity. At 11:30, the shareholder session begins. Tendai expects me to support the merger framework and confirm a family-aligned engagement by the end of the session. He thinks the scandal around you weakens me. He looked at Khadra. I'm going to let him think that for 12 more minutes. Khadra studied him. Then what? Then I break the room. The simplicity of the answer almost stole her breath. He pointed to Bekizizwe's satchel. When I call your name, you enter first. Then Khadra. Nothing before that. Do not react to provocation. Provocation, Khadra repeated. He looked at her fully now. They will try to humiliate you before they understand they can't. Something cold moved through her. Not fear this time. Readiness. And my mother, she asked. Jabari's expression turned glacial. If she chooses silence, it will bury her. If she chooses lies, I will bury them. At 11:31, the session began. The shareholders' hall was amphitheater-shaped, all dark wood-layered seating and enormous digital screens displaying the company crest above the stage. Cameras from business networks recorded the formal opening. Legal observers sat near the side aisles. The board occupied the front crescent like a ring of judges. Jabari took the podium to applause. He let it continue longer than necessary. Tendai relaxed visibly in his seat. Nafisa lowered her eyes as if already calculating recovery. Jabari began with numbers. Revenue growth, international expansion, risk management, projected strategic alignment. His voice carried perfectly measured, authoritative, impossible to read. Then he shifted to recent reputational concerns. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Tendai leaned back with satisfied patience. Here it comes, he thought. Containment, damage control, a graceful apology for a private indiscretion, maybe even a sacrifice. Instead, Jabari said, For the last 24 hours, malicious rumors have circulated about an employee of this company, Miss Khadra Issa. Dozens of eyes sharpened immediately. He continued, Those rumors were not accidental. They were manufactured, amplified, and weaponized to hide a far older truth. The room stilled. Tendai's expression changed first. Not panic, confusion. That was enough. Jabari clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit with internal HR access logs, flagged medical privacy breaches, time-stamped file retrievals, and a chain of email forwards linking anonymous blog content to a private communications consultant previously paid through a shell vendor attached to one of Tendai's side entities. Gasps broke across the hall like dropped glass. Tendai shot upright. This is outrageous, Jabari cut him off without raising his voice. Sit down. And because power recognized power even in disgrace, Tendai sat. Jabari kept going. He displayed Khadra's salary advance request from St. Bridget beside evidence that the record had been accessed illegally by senior HR personnel. Then the cropped gala photos. Then the unedited originals showing event staff positioning Khadra near the stage under direct instruction from Nafisa's chief aide. A murmur rolled through the hall louder now. Nafisa did not move. Only the pulse in her throat betrayed anything. Jabari turned one page further into hell. Bring in Mr. Bekizizwe Dube. The side doors opened. Bekizizwe entered slowly, carrying the satchel like a priest bringing relics to a trial. Recognition rippled through the oldest board members. Some remembered him, some wished they did not. He took the witness microphone, and with hands that shook only once, began naming dates, locations, cash movements, and instructions tied to the disappearance of Asha Bara and her daughter after the assault by Bashiru Bello. The hall erupted, not loudly at first, but in layers, whispers, denials, furious questions, chairs shifting, one woman covering her mouth in open horror. Tendai stood again. This is unverified slander against the dead. Jabari did not even look at him. Then perhaps the living would like to speak. He pressed the side console. The central screen changed. A live video call connected. St. Bridget, room 12. Nurse Efe adjusted the tablet camera with trembling hands. Asha lay propped against pillows, frail, one side of her face still weakened, but awake. Fully awake enough for recognition to ignite when Khadra's face appeared at the edge of the stage. Khadra had entered during the uproar, and now stood just off the podium motionless, every eye in the hall on her. Her mother saw her and wept. Then, slowly, painfully, Asha turned her face toward the room full of wealth and history that had erased her. Her voice came broken, torn by years and illness. But it came. Nafisa knew. The hall went dead silent. Asha swallowed tears running into her hair. "Brother, Bashiru," she fought for breath, for language, for justice. "Chukwudi hid me. She buried me. Every syllable cost her. Every syllable landed." Khadra stood, frozen hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She had imagined truth, yes, but not like this. Not in a room built by the people who had profited from her mother's silence. Not with cameras recording while old men shifted in expensive chairs and suddenly discovered conscience. Jabari did not rush to comfort her. He did something harder. He gave her the microphone. The gesture stunned the room almost as much as the testimony had. Khadra looked at him once. He nodded. That was all. She stepped forward and faced the shareholders. Not as an intern, not as a victim. As the living bill the Okonkwo family had tried never to pay. "My mother was not a mistake," she said, voice steady despite the tears in it. "She was a woman your power treated as disposable. I was not brought into this company because anyone cared about talent. I was brought close so I could be watched." Her eyes moved to Nafisa. Controlled. Silenced before I understood why my life began inside fear. No one interrupted. Not even Tendai now, because the room had finally grasped the scale of the collapse. Khadra lifted her chin. "You all speak about reputation like it is a holy thing. It is not holy if it is built on a woman's ruin." That was the sentence that broke whatever denial remained. Voices rose. Directors demanded emergency adjournment. Legal counsel whispered frantically. 2 shareholders near the center row began openly calling for a special ethics vote. And through all of it, Jabari remained still. Then he delivered the final blow. "As of this moment," he said, "I am calling for the immediate suspension of all executive authorities tied to Madam Nafisa Okonkwo. Pending criminal referral, the termination of Tendai Moyo for governance fraud and reputational sabotage, and a full external investigation into family office interference, sealed settlements, and illegal employee targeting." Tendai lunged to speak, but security was already moving. Nafisa rose slowly at last. Dignity gathered around her like a final cloak. She looked not at the room, at Jabari. "You would destroy your own mother for this girl?" The question hung in the air, poisonous and pathetic. Jabari answered without hesitation. "No," he said. "I would expose a lie for the woman you tried to erase." The first sound after Jabari's words was not outrage. It was silence. A vast, stunned, almost sacred silence that spread through the shareholders' hall, as if the building itself had finally understood what it had been made to protect. Then everything broke at once. Voices rose in jagged bursts. Legal counsel stood. 2 board members began speaking over each other. A woman from the ethics committee demanded immediate procedural control. A cluster of journalists outside the glass doors pressed forward as security tried to contain the movement after word leaked through phones and assistants like smoke under a locked door. On the main screen, the live call from St. Brigid still held for 3 more trembling seconds. Asha lay weak against the pillows, tears on her face, her breath uneven, but visible. Then Nurse Efe gently ended the feed. The screen went black, and the room deprived of the woman it had buried for years had no choice but to face the living consequences left behind. Nafisa Okonkwo remained standing through the authority she had worn all morning had changed shape. It was no longer the effortless power of a woman who controlled outcomes before others noticed choices were being made. Now it was defiance. Old, proud, wounded defiance. She looked first at the board, then at the shareholders, then finally at Jabari. "You are making a spectacle out of grief," she said. The sentence would have worked on a weaker room. On a better day, in an older version of this empire where words like decorum and legacy still frightened people into silence. But too much had already been seen. The chair of the board, a grey-haired man who had spent 20 years never opposing the Okonkwo family in public, rose slowly from his seat. "With respect, madam," he said, and for the first time the phrase carried no submission at all. This ceased being private grief when company systems were used to surveil and destroy an employee. That landed harder than any accusation from outsiders, because it came from inside the machine. Nafisa's eyes hardened. "You enjoyed our family's stability when it made your fortunes possible." The chairman held her gaze. "Stability purchased with buried crimes is only delayed collapse." A ripple of low agreement moved through the chamber. Tendai Moyo tried one last time to save himself. "This is still an unverified narrative built around emotion," he snapped, pulling against the two security officers now stationed at either side of him. A damaged woman on a clinic feed, a frightened old employee, and an intern with a vendetta. Do not constitute. "Enough," Jabari said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Tendai stopped speaking because something in Jabari's face warned him that one word more would end not merely his career, but his dignity. Jabari stepped away from the podium and handed procedural control to the legal oversight officer, then turned directly to the security team. "Escort Mr. Moyo from company premises. Freeze his device, access his vendor channels, and all accounts tied to discretionary communications spending." Tendai laughed sharply. "You can't do that without board review." Jabari looked at him with such cold clarity that even the laugh died halfway. "I just did." As security moved him toward the exit, Tendai twisted once toward Khadra. It was a mistake. He meant it as a final glare, maybe a threat, maybe a promise that men like him were never truly finished. But the look on Khadra's face stopped him. She was not frightened. Not anymore. She had gone beyond fright into something cleaner and more dangerous, moral certainty. Tendai looked away first. That mattered more than anyone in the room knew, because men like him lived by making women lower their eyes. When the doors shut behind him, the atmosphere changed again, less chaotic now, more judicial. The board had crossed the first threshold of scandal and now entered the colder territory of consequence. Emergency motions were proposed. An independent investigative committee. Immediate suspension of family office discretionary power. Digital preservation orders. Criminal referral consultation. Vote after vote after vote. Khadra heard the words, but only as if from a great distance. Adrenaline was draining from her body in waves, leaving behind shaking hands and strange hollowness. She stood near the side aisle while assistants ran documents across the front rows and legal staff whispered into headsets. For the first time since entering the hall, she let herself breathe. Not deeply, just enough to notice that she was still standing. Biekizizwe came to her side quietly. "You did well," he murmured. Khadra stared ahead. "My mother did the impossible. I only repeated what should have been heard years ago." The old man nodded, eyes wet. Sometimes history only listens when the right voice survives long enough. That nearly undid her. Across the room, Nafisa finally sat. Not because she accepted defeat, because the mathematics of power had changed too rapidly to remain upright. She no longer controlled the outcome. That fact had entered the room and refused to leave. When the emergency session adjourned 47 minutes later, the board had voted to suspend her advisory and proxy authorities, freeze all discretionary family office channels, and retain outside counsel for a formal criminal and civil review related to Bashiru Bello Chukwudi Okonkwo's prior settlements and the company's unlawful targeting of Khadra. It was not prison. Not yet. But it was the beginning of accountability. And sometimes the beginning was the part powerful people feared most. Outside the chamber, the hallway became a storm of movement. Lawyers, Assistants. Reporters being held at distance. Security rotating routes. Phones exploding with messages. Jabari cut through all of it and found Khadra near a side window overlooking the city. For several seconds he said nothing. Neither did she. Below them, Lagos moved as always, restless, crowded, indifferent to private collapses. Traffic crawled. Vendors crossed intersections. Sunlight flashed off distant glass towers. Somewhere out there, thousands of lives continued without knowing an empire had just cracked open above them. Finally, Jabari spoke. They've sent an ambulance with better neurological support to St. Bridget. Asher is being transferred to a private recovery unit under independent care, not company medical. No one from my family will control it. Khadra looked at him then. Not with gratitude, with exhaustion too deep for performance. Why, she asked. His brow drew slightly. Why what? Why are you still helping? The question cost her. He could hear that, maybe because it was really 10 questions at once. Why are you still here when I came into your life under secrecy? Why did you fight your own mother? Why do you look at me like I am both wound and truth? Why does it still hurt that none of this has destroyed what I feel for you? Jabari answered the smallest version of the question first. Because your mother deserves safety. Khadra held his eyes. And me. The air shifted. People rushed past at the end of the corridor, but around them the moment narrowed into stillness. Jabari spoke slowly, as if the truth itself required careful handling now. Because I failed you. She looked away at once. He continued anyway. When the rumors began, I should have protected you before I knew where they came from. When you first told me my mother had planted you near me, I treated it as strategy, before I treated it as danger. When you pulled back, I kept asking for explanations instead of recognizing what fear was doing to you. Khadra's throat tightened. He was right. That made it worse, not better. You did not know everything she said quietly. No, he replied, but I knew enough to choose better. Silence again. Then he said the one thing she had not prepared herself to hear. I am sorry. No defense attached, no self-justifying sentence after it. Just apology. From a man like Jabari that was not small. Khadra closed her eyes briefly. You weren't the one who hurt my mother. No, he said. But I carry the name that protected the man who did. She turned back sharply. And what do you plan to do with that name now? Something firm settled in his face. Use it against itself. That answer held. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. It was better than that. It was responsible. Later that evening, after 3 hours of legal statements, medical transfer calls, and procedural arrangements, Khadra stood in the private recovery room where Asher had been moved. The room was cleaner than St. Bridget. Brighter. Better staffed. The machines were newer. The sheets actually matched. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like surviving long enough to be relocated. Asha was awake when Khadra entered. Weak, yes. Drained, but clearer than she had been in years. Khadra sat beside the bed and took her hand. For a long time, they simply looked at each other. Then Asha whispered each word fragile but real. You know. Khadra nodded once. Tears filled Asha's eyes at once. I tried to keep you away. I know. He found me. Her breath hitched. Bashiru. Then his sister. Then the family. Always the family. Khadra bent her head forehead, touching their joined hands. Why didn't you tell me? Asha's lips trembled. Because I wanted. One part of you, untouched by them. That broke something cleanly inside Khadra. Not in destruction. In grief. She wept, then not like she had in fear or shock, but like a daughter finally hearing the shape of her mother's love beneath all the silence and confusion and terror. Asha stroked her fingers weakly against Khadra's hand. "Chukwudi sent money," she whispered. "Not mercy. Guilt. I know. He wanted to send us away, said he would handle Bashiru. But Nafisa..." Her face tightened. She said scandal kills women first. Khadra laughed through tears because it was such a cruelly perfect sentence, true and poisoned at the same time. Asha looked at her more carefully then. "There is more pain," she murmured. "In your face." Khadra's breathing faltered. A mother always saw it, even now. She tried to look away, but Asha's fingers pressed faintly into hers. "The son?" Asha asked. Khadra let out a broken breath. "Yes." Asha closed her eyes for a moment, grief and understanding crossing her ruined features together. When she opened them again, her voice was barely sound. "He is not them." Khadra swallowed hard. "He is still part of it." "Yes," Asha whispered. "And sometimes, love enters through the same door as harm. That does not make them the same thing." Khadra could not answer, because she had spent days trying to separate those truths and failing. Near midnight, she stepped into the corridor outside the room to breathe. Jabari was there, not inside, not intruding, just waiting by the far wall with his jacket over one arm, exactly as he had been the night before at St. Brigid, except now there was no cold detachment left in him. Only fatigue, grief, and a steadiness she was beginning to understand was rarer than charm. "She's stronger tonight," he said. Khadra nodded. He did not move closer. "The Police Financial Crimes Unit has requested the archived settlement files by morning. Tendai's consultant has already begun cooperating. Miriam has been suspended pending data privacy charges." A small, fierce satisfaction moved through her. Justice at last had started naming names. But that was not the hardest thing between them. Jabari seemed to know that too. After a moment he said quietly, "I won't ask anything from you tonight." Khadra looked at him. "Not forgiveness," he said. "Not trust. Not even hope." The words hung gently in the corridor. Then he added, "Only this, don't mistake my silence for indifference. I am trying to stand near your pain without claiming it." That landed deeper than anything else he had said, because it was the opposite of what powerful people usually did. They claimed, they directed, they interpreted other people's wounds as if owning the language around suffering made them innocent. Jabari was doing something harder. He was leaving room. Khadra studied him for a long moment. Then, without stepping closer, she said, "That might be the first honest thing anyone in your family ever gave me." His face changed, not into a smile, into something more fragile, almost sorrow, almost relief. And in that quiet hospital corridor with justice finally moving and old lies collapsing behind them, Khadra understood the price of karma more clearly than she ever had before. The guilty would pay in courts, headlines, disgrace, and the loss of power, but the innocent paid too, in trust, in time, in the years stolen from a mother and daughter, in the tenderness that now stood between two people who had every reason to walk away and yet still could not stop feeling the pull of each other's shattered honesty. Healing, she realized, would not begin with romance. It would begin with truth surviving the night. 6 months later, the Okonkwo name still existed, but it no longer stood untouched above the city like a polished god. Now it stood trial in the public mind every day. That Khadra thought was a better kind of survival. The newspapers had done what newspapers did. For weeks, Lagos had been drunk on revelation. There had been headlines about buried settlements, family corruption, unlawful surveillance, executive retaliation, and the old violence hidden beneath legacy wealth. Commentators fought on television. Former employees began speaking. 2 more women came forward with stories about Bashiru Bello that had been smothered years earlier by money and intimidation. Every new testimony widened the grave the past had dug for itself. Tendai Moyo had been formally charged with governance fraud evidence tampering and criminal defamation tied to the smear campaign against Khadra. Miriam Adesina faced prosecution for unlawful access to protected employee records and retaliatory misconduct. Nafisa Okonkwo, stripped of company authority and social certainty, was no longer the untouchable matriarch people once rose to greet. Her name still opened some doors. But now those doors opened into rooms full of questions, and Chukwudi Okonkwo, long dead and once praised as a disciplined titan, had been reintroduced to the public as something more truthful and far less flattering, a powerful man who had not committed the first violence, but had chosen silence, settlements, and strategic cowardice over justice. It mattered that history had corrected the record. It mattered even more that it had cost so much. Khadra stood at the wide window of the new Women's Legal Support Center and watched late afternoon light spill across the compound below. The building had once been an abandoned administrative annex owned by one of Okonkwo Global's subsidiaries. Now it had been transformed into the first headquarters of the Asha Foundation, a program jointly funded by Jabari's restructuring initiative and independent partners built to support women erased by family violence, coercion, sealed settlements, and forced silence. Lawyers worked on the second floor. Trauma counselors used the rooms on the east wing. Temporary lodging for crisis cases occupied the rear side of the compound. The sign at the gate did not carry the Okonkwo family crest. That had been Khadra's condition. If healing was real, it could not wear the same symbol that had once helped bury it. Behind her, footsteps sounded lightly against the polished floor. She knew them before she turned. Jabari. He entered carrying 2 paper cups of tea from the small kitchen downstairs. No bodyguards, no performative presence, no executive shadow following him from room to room. These days when he came here, he came quietly. He held 1 cup out to her. "You missed lunch again." Khadra took it. "That sounds like an accusation. It is a pattern." A faint smile touched her mouth before she could stop it. "You run a company. You should respect patterns. I respect healthy ones." He leaned beside her at the window, close enough to feel, not close enough to crowd. That had become his discipline. Near, but never taking. Present, but never claiming. Below them, a young receptionist guided an older woman through the front courtyard, while a lawyer met them at the entrance. Across the far side, a small delivery van unloaded donated supplies. Life moved with purpose. Not glamour, not performance. Purpose. Jabari looked down at the courtyard, too. "We registered the 2nd satellite office in Nairobi this morning." Khadra turned to him. "That fast. The demand is faster." The words carried no triumph, only reality, because the Foundation had opened its hotline 3 months earlier and had not known a quiet day since. For a moment, they said nothing. Their silences had changed over the last half-year. In the beginning, silence between them had been full of landmines, things unsaid because no one knew whether speech would destroy what little remained. Then silence became careful respect. After that, something softer. Not ease exactly. Ease came too cheaply for what they had lived through. What came instead was trust built with both hands. Slowly, deliberately, one honest sentence at a time. "How was court?" Khadra asked. Jabari's gaze stayed on the courtyard. "Ugly." She waited. Nafisa agreed to partial liability in the civil obstruction case. He paused. Not because she understands the damage, because she finally understands she can't outlast it. Khadra looked down into her tea. "And how are you?" It was not an easy question, and she did not ask it lightly. Jabari let out a breath that almost sounded amused. "That depends. Are you asking as the Foundation's director, or as the woman who knows my mother taught me to mistake control for strength?" Khadra glanced at him. "The second one. That earned the smallest, tiredest smile. "I am learning," he said, "and being embarrassed often." "Good." He looked at her then, and warmth flickered between them. Not flashy, not reckless, the kind that had survived scrutiny and grief and still chosen to remain. Below them, a little girl crossed the courtyard holding her mother's hand. For one instant, the child looked up at the building with something like wonder. Khadra felt her throat tighten, because there had been a time when she herself had been a child, hidden inside systems too large and cruel to understand. A child whose life had depended on frightened adults making bargains with wolves. Now other women arrived here with children clinging to their skirts, and no one told them to disappear. No one told them they were the price of someone else's reputation. That was what real power should have done all along. A soft knock sounded at the office door. "Come in," Khadra called. Asha entered slowly with the help of a carved wooden cane. She still tired easily. Her speech still sometimes caught. One hand still weakened in cold weather, but she no longer lived in fear of footsteps outside the room. Her eyes were clearer now, her back straighter. Even her quietness had changed shape. It was no longer the quiet of someone erased. It was the quiet of someone returning. Khadra crossed the room at once. "You should have called. I would have come downstairs." Asha smiled faintly. "And miss seeing your face when you forget the world exists." Jabari moved forward respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mama Asha." He had asked permission before using that form of address. He had not assumed it. She had granted it 3 months ago on a day Khadra had not been able to stop crying after a witness deposition, and Jabari had stayed outside the room for 2 hours just to make sure she was not alone when she came out. Asha looked at him now with the deep, complicated tenderness reserved for people who had once belonged to the house of pain and yet chosen not to become its servants. "You are both working too much," she said. Khadra and Jabari exchanged a glance. Then, to their shared irritation, they both laughed. Asha lowered herself carefully into the chair by the bookshelf. "I came because the tailor called. The clothes are ready." Khadra blinked. "Already?" The woman said if she waited for you to remember your own event, she would die in the shop. Jabari's mouth twitched. She may be correct. Khadra narrowed her eyes at both of them. "I regret teaching either of you confidence," but the warmth in the room deepened. Tonight was the opening ceremony for the Foundation's Permanent Legal Fund and Survivor Fellowship Program. Donors, advocates, journalists, and civic leaders would attend. It would not be a gala. Khadra had refused that word. No crystal, no orchestrated glamour, no performance built on pain. Just testimony commitments, names, and a promise that this place would outlive headlines. Still, there would be speeches. And one more thing. Only 3 people in the room knew that. Later, as evening settled gold across the city, the courtyard filled. Lanterns glowed softly along the pathways. Musicians played low, warm instrumentals near the entrance. Women who had once arrived at the Foundation trembling now stood at welcome tables greeting guests with the dignity they had slowly rebuilt. Some wore Foundation badges, some carried case folders. Some were studying part-time under the scholarship program funded by the First Restitution Pool. The world had not become just, but something inside it had been corrected. Khadra stepped onto the small outdoor stage in a deep, earth-toned gown, simple and elegant, her pendant resting at her throat. Applause rose from the audience, not the hungry applause of spectacle, but the steady kind given to someone people had witnessed become real in public. She spoke without notes, about silence, about the cost of being told your pain must remain private, so powerful people can stay comfortable, about mothers who keep breathing inside systems built to erase them, about daughters who deserve histories without shame, about justice not as vengeance, but as the refusal to let lies inherit the future. Many people cried, including men who probably did not expect to. When she finished, the applause that followed was long and full. Then Jabari took the stage. He wore no arrogance tonight, only a dark, tailored suit and the same steady gravity that had become more human over the last 6 months. He did not speak like a CEO rescuing anyone. He spoke like a man publicly refusing the inheritance of cowardice. He named the failures of his family. He named the harm of strategic silence. He named the tendency of power to call itself protection while feeding on the vulnerable. Then he said, "This foundation exists because one woman survived, one daughter refused to disappear, and truth finally became more expensive to hide than to face." He turned then, toward Khadra. The audience followed his gaze at once. She felt the shift in the air before he even stepped down from the podium. Oh no, she thought. And because life had a wicked sense of humor, part of her also thought, oh yes. Jabari crossed the stage with the deliberate calm of a man who had once hidden behind control and had since learned that vulnerability felt more dangerous and more honest. He stopped in front of her. Then, without flourish, he took the microphone again and said, "There was a time I thought love meant choosing the right woman under the right conditions, approved by the right people at the right moment for the right reasons. I was wrong." A hush swept the courtyard. Khadra stared at him, heart suddenly wild. Jabari continued, eyes never leaving hers. Love is what remains after. Lies are cut away. It is what stays when pride loses, when blood is tested, when history humiliates, when the easy version dies, and something truer refuses to. The crowd had gone utterly still. Then he did the one thing no one in that audience expected the once unreachable CEO of Okonkwo Global to do in public. He knelt. A collective gasp moved through the courtyard. Khadra's hand flew to her mouth. Jabari looked up at her not as a ruler, not as a savior, not as a man displaying possession, but as the man who had fought his own name to stand cleanly before her. "I cannot return what your mother lost," he said. "I cannot erase what my family protected. I cannot promise a life without battles, because now we both know better than that." His voice softened. "But I can promise this: no lie will ever again be asked to live between us. No silence will ever again be used as love. No part of your life will ever need to shrink beside mine." He opened the small velvet box in his hand. Inside was not a diamond spectacle, just a ring of elegant simplicity, gold and understated, set with a stone the color of clear dawn. "Khadra Issa," he said, and even hearing her full name in his voice felt like a vow. "Will you let me build the rest of my life telling you the truth?" Tears rushed into her eyes so quickly she laughed through them. The audience disappeared. The lanterns disappeared. Even the city seemed to fall away. There was only the man kneeling in front of her, and the impossible road that had brought them here, not through fantasy, not through innocence, but through fire, justice, grief, and choosing truth anyway. Behind her, Asha rose shakily to her feet with one hand over her mouth. Khadra saw her, saw the tears, saw the blessing in them, and understood then that healing did not mean the past had vanished. It meant the past no longer had the final word. "Yes," she whispered. Jabari's eyes closed for 1 second, as if relief itself had weight. Then, louder, with laughter breaking through her tears, Khadra said, "Yes." The courtyard erupted. Applause, crying, cheers, hands clapping. Women who had once entered the foundation shattered, now smiling through tears as if one honest joy could belong to all of them for a minute. Jabari rose and slipped the ring onto her finger with hands not quite steady. Khadra laughed again at that. "So the famous CEO can still be nervous," she murmured. "Only in the matters that survive me," he said. That nearly made her cry all over again. When he drew her into his arms, it was not the embrace of conquest. It was reunion. earned, gentle, public in the cleanest way with nothing left to hide. And as the music rose softly again, and lantern light trembled over faces once marked by sorrow, the story that had begun in secrecy ended where all true healing begins, not with perfection, not with forgetting, but with truth, responsibility, justice, and love, strong enough to stay after the lies were gone. After everything, the deepest lesson was not that evil always loses quickly, because often it does not. Sometimes lies live for years inside polished houses protected by money titles, fear, and the silence of people who call themselves practical. Sometimes innocent people pay the price for crimes they did not commit. Sometimes mothers are erased so families can keep their reputations, and daughters grow up carrying wounds they cannot even name. But truth has a patience that lies do not. The truth may be buried, mocked, delayed, or bought off for a season, but it keeps breathing under the ground. And when it rises, it does more than expose the guilty. It gives the wounded back their names. Khadra's story reminds us that real love is not blind to pain. Real love does not demand silence. It does not ask someone to shrink, hide, or bleed quietly, so comfort can survive. Real love stands beside truth, even when truth humiliates the powerful. It chooses responsibility over image, courage over convenience, and healing over pride. And justice is not only punishment. Justice is also restoration, a mother regaining dignity, a daughter no longer ashamed of her beginning, a man refusing to inherit cowardice, a new door opening where an old one was locked by fear. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part touched you most. And if you believe stories about truth, justice, and healing still matter in this world, subscribe and stay with this channel for more.